welcome to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there. Also, we are streaming live on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That is facebook.com/Activist Post. Well, it's 10 a.m. Monday morning, and we are coming to you from fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. Great show planned for you today. Our guest, super excited about this. Our guest is the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. He ran for Prime Minister in the last election, and we may be seeing him running again in the next one. Tim Moen is our guest. Also, we have some great stories. We've got a story. I've been wanting to really find a good hook to cover the legalization versus decriminalization issue. I think we have a good one with Nevada in this coming week, supposed to be entering the new era of marijuana legalization, but there have been some very predictable hiccups. Vinstradamus predicted that these sorts of hiccups would be happening, so we're going to talk about that, as well as some things that came up when I was in PorcFest that I think are related. And also, I've said we're not going to do war porn, but I do want to talk about Syria. There's been these developments in Syria that seem out of place, fighter jets getting shot down, threats being made, and then there's this underlying story of what's really happening. And believe me, it has less and less to do with ISIS and more to do with the rise of the violent left. So, yeah, I know you're probably a little bit surprised about that, but I assure you it does. Just stick with me. To help us get through all of this today, as always, my good friend, co-host, and producer, Mr. Christian Reyes. Christian, good morning.
Good morning, Vin. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for having me, dude. I mean, you're the one at the controls. So I just got back from PorcFest in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about
It was a
that.
lot of fun. I had a great time. Super interesting event. The most interesting part about it was you had people rolling around with AR-15s strapped to their backs and Glocks on their hips, hanging out with purple-haired SJWs.
Crazy.
Very interesting. It took place in northern New Hampshire. It was actually I flew into Boston. It was a long drive. It was like 3.5 hours.
Oh, shit.
Up, just straight north. And in the mountains, absolutely beautiful scenery. There's just trees as far as the eye could see. Well, the eye can only see this far because of the amount of trees that there are, right? The people were great. It was a very agorist setup. As a matter of fact, people were like branding themselves as agorists. There was a company called Agorist Hosting who was providing the Wi-Fi. And some great speakers, but people were selling all kinds of different things, and a lot of it for cryptocurrency. The Swarm City guys were there.
Nice.
Got to hang out with them quite a bit. Spoke on a panel, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I spoke on a panel that was about the decriminalization/legalization of sex work. It's a term that I don't like, but because that's an industry that I obviously have a great deal of experience with, I was on a panel with some other people, and we were specifically speaking about a bill that had been introduced by a state representative, Elizabeth Edwards Appel, and it was ostensibly to decriminalize sex work. She actually wasn't able to be at the panel, but I think as we go through this, we're going to talk about Nevada, and then we're going to talk about this bill. And I think there's a lot of lessons about decriminalization versus legalization. It's really a prime case study of why we need to be thinking more deeply about these as people who love liberty. If what we're really after is liberty, we need to be thinking a lot more carefully before we go in and start mucking around with the laws.
Right.
So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the Syria story because it actually also has to do with some anarchism, some anarcho-communism at least, and another reason why we just got to really be looking deeply. But I had a great time, man.
Yeah, it sounded like
Only unfortunate thing, I gave a great talk. Had my camera set up, had spent the whole day, got the sound set up, it was coming off the board, had it jacked into my camera, gave a great talk, got done with the talk, got off. Great talk about agorism. The people enjoyed it. It was great. Hour-long talk. Got off, looked at the camera. I had forgotten to hit record.
Oh, dude, I was looking for it too. I was waiting for it.
Don't!
Shit.
There will be many more talks. It was a good one. So look, people, if you heard it, you're a VIP. You were a VIP on that. Maybe somebody else recorded it. I don't know. The one in Anarchapulco, somebody recorded it with their phone. So people were taking pictures and whatnot. Maybe something will show up. Who knows?
Cool.
Anyway, it was great. It was a great time. I'm sure other talks are going to come up from that, and I will be back for sure.
Awesome.
And I'm starting to get sold on New Hampshire, to be honest. I really like it up there. But we don't have a lot of time. I want to try to get through this in the first hour. Maybe we'll go over a little bit. I want to try to get through both of these stories in the first hour so that we can have plenty of time with Tim Moen, who I got a chance to meet when he was here, I don't know, about a month ago. And this dude's inspiring, man. Like,
awesome.
There's not a lot of politicians that I like, but I think I like him, and I think you're going to like him too, and I think the audience is really going to like him. So let's just get right to this, man. And sort of the first thing where I want to start off is, there was a lot of talk when I was up at PorcFest, and I hear it more and more. And even Jordan Peterson, when I was on the way back, he had posted up a speech. This conservative versus liberal, right? I never thought that I would consider myself a conservative. But I think those terms have changed. I think conservative used to mean, when I was growing up, what I always thought that it meant was racist. Right? That basically it's like, America's for white people, don't. Now I feel like the moves, the people who are, that's really a past and dead generation that has no more power. I don't really think that that's in our culture, not in the way that it was, certainly. I just don't think people are that concerned about race. I think people are much more concerned about ideology. I think people are much more concerned about government policy and how it's going to affect everybody. Because now it does, right? Like, we're living in an era where a kid born today is never going to know a time when they didn't see same-sex couples married, for instance. Like, it's just going to be completely normal. Like, there's not going to be anything. So to continue talking about it is kind of, it's a moot point.
Yeah.
But in terms of conservatism, what I do see and what I'm starting to see more and more, maybe it's because I'm getting older, maybe it's just because there's more information out there, is really there is wisdom of the past that has worked for a long, long time. And as we move forward, we can move forward with new technology. We can move forward with new social organizational structures, and we will. But to disregard the knowledge of the past that came from a lot of mistakes, and the knowledge of the past that's about what is the nature of human nature, to disregard that, we disregard it at our own peril. Right? So this first story, as we start talking about legalization, decriminalization with what's happening in Nevada, I think let's pull to the past. A little Confucius, right? Confucius. Two quotes of his that I like because they're directly related to liberty and being a libertarian. And since we have Tim Moen, the leader of the Libertarian Party, on today, I think we're going to talk a little bit about liberty, as we always do. Confucius says, when words lose their meaning, people lose their liberty. And, related to it, the beginning of wisdom is to call things by their proper name. So, that'll take us into our first news story. So, it's very important when we talk about this legalization, decriminalization, that we call things by their proper name. And that the words have meaning. Because when words lose their meaning, as Confucius says, when words lose their meaning, people lose their liberty. July 1st is supposed to be the legalization day here in Nevada. The people voted for legalized weed, not decriminalized weed. And I've been speaking out for a very long time that legalization is going to make you less free. We're going to talk about why that is, and we're going to show you the example that is happening right now where I sit. And to start this off, great story. I think probably the best story on what's going on right now in Nevada and how this is getting all mucked up. is on activist posts, Carrie Wedler. So the title, The Alcohol Industry is Trying to Monopolize Legal Marijuana Distribution. A recent state court ruling out of Carson City, Nevada has essentially reaffirmed an effective monopoly for liquor vendors over the pending legal cannabis market. The ruling, which came in response to a lawsuit from holders of liquor licenses in the state, determined that for the first 18 months, that's a year and a half, of cannabis legalization, only those who already have liquor licenses will be allowed to distribute weed. As a result, the ruling also appeared to postpone the planned commencement of retail sales on July 1st. According to the provisions of the initiative that legalizes recreational cannabis, as cited by Judge James Wilson Jr. in his ruling, quote, for 18 months after the Department of Taxation begins to receive applications for marijuana establishments, the department shall issue licenses for marijuana distributors pursuant to this chapter only to persons holding a wholesale license pursuant to Chapter 369 of NRS. That means an alcohol wholesale license, unless the department determines that an insufficient number of marijuana distributors will result from this limitation. A wholesale dealer license pursuant to Chapter 369 of NRS is required for all liquor vendors in the state, meaning the only entities eligible to distribute cannabis in the state for the first year and a half of legalization will be liquor vendors, unless they cannot meet demand as determined by the government. It is unsurprising that this was included in the provision, considering the Independent Alcohol Distributors of Nevada, IADN, the plaintiffs in the suit, donated $87,000 to efforts to pass Question 2, which legalized recreational cannabis. As Time reported back in 2015, before the ballot was even put to a vote, quote, backers of the initiative consulted with alcohol distributors when they wrote the measure to avoid a fight, earning the financial contribution in the process. The recent lawsuit was initiated after the Department of Taxation determined there was an insufficient number of liquor licensees who wanted to distribute cannabis, and as such, others would be able to apply. A decision by the Independent Alcohol Distributors of Nevada disputed. A decision the Independent Alcohol Distributors of Nevada disputed. Judge Wilson ruled the Department of Taxation had failed to adequately acknowledge interest from liquor license holders who wanted to participate in the new industry, ultimately reaffirming that these liquor vendors have exclusive rights to sell marijuana, entirely excluding existing medical marijuana retailers. As the Associated Press reported, Judge Carson said the members of the Independent Alcohol Distributors of Nevada demonstrated they will suffer irreparable harm if he doesn't block the state from licensing existing marijuana business distributors. So we basically have a situation right now where no distributor licenses are going to be sent out or are going to be accepted. There were 90-something applications waiting for the ruling, and now it's down to 5. Those were alcohol distributors. Now, anybody who knows anything about Nevada basically knows that this state has a functional duopoly when it comes to alcohol. It is the largest alcohol consumption, the largest alcohol per capita consumption state in the nation. However, there are only 2 major alcohol distributors that functionally distribute all of the alcohol to both stores, bars, casinos, Southern Wine and Spirits, and Wirtz. Those are the 2. And they've got a major stranglehold on the alcohol business here. Las Vegas Distillery, who has the first craft distiller license, went through a major battle with them. They're the ones who distill my vodka, baby vodka, and they're also our neighbors. They went through a major battle with those 2. Luckily, they set up a boutique distributor who I guess could potentially have also become a marijuana distributor. But what is that? What do alcohol distributors know about distributing marijuana? So now you're going to have these retail licenses supposedly given out as planned, but there's nowhere for them to legally purchase their product from. There you go. Legalization. Good job, guys. So let's actually look at these laws, because let's really show what the people voted for, and then let's show what could have happened and why this was a cock-up of amazing proportions. So let's actually look at the Nevada weed law. This is NV laws here. So Mind you, you'll see in brackets on all of this, it says, this section was proposed by an initiative petition and approved by the voters at the 2016 general election, and therefore it is not subject to legislative amendment or repeal until after November 22nd, 2019. Okay, so these are all the things that people voted for. This didn't come from the state. This came from the people being manipulated by that $87,000 worth of donation from the alcohol industry. So let's see if this really legalized marijuana or not. So this chapter may be cited as the Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act. So that's what you voted for. Here are the findings and declarations. In the interest of public health and public safety, and in order to better focus state and local law enforcement resources on crimes involving violence and personal property, the people of the state of Nevada find and declare that the use of marijuana should be legal for persons 21 years of age or older, and its cultivation and sale should be regulated similar to other legal businesses. So you look at it and you say, okay, 21 and over, you can smoke weed, and you can cultivate it, right? Right? So, the people of the state of Nevada find and declare that the cultivation and sale of marijuana should be taken from the domain of criminals and be regulated under a controlled system where businesses will be taxed and the revenue will be dedicated to public education and the enforcement of the regulations of the chapter. So, let's talk about, we talk about legalization, and what most people say is, oh, so that means I'll be able to smoke and not go to jail, which your average smoker, when was the last time? I mean, I've been smoking marijuana for decades, and I never once thought that I was even stood a chance of going to jail. I wasn't trafficking. I wasn't selling. Let's just go to the next and let's look. Here's the effect of the chapter. The provisions of this chapter do not permit any person to engage in and do not prevent the imposition of any civil, criminal, or other penalty for, so here's all the things that you still can't do. Driving, operating, or being in actual physical control of a vehicle, aircraft, or vessel under power or sale while under the influence of marijuana or while impaired by marijuana. Knowingly delivering, giving, selling, administering, or offering to sell, administer, give, or deliver marijuana to a person under 21 years of age, unless, one, the recipient is permitted to possess marijuana pursuant to the medical marijuana statutes. Two, the person demanded and was shown bona fide documentary evidence of the majority and identity of the recipient issued by a federal, state, county, municipal government, or subdivision thereof. You can't have it on the grounds of Nevada Department of Corrections. Can't have it on the grounds of a school. Undertaking any task under the influence of marijuana that constitutes negligence or professional malpractice, so you can't practice medicine under the influence of weed. And then it says that various different states and local governments can control, and also businesses can say, you're either allowed to smoke here or not. Okay, moving forward. So, this is certain acts, exemption from state or local prosecution for certain acts involving marijuana and marijuana paraphernalia. Notwithstanding any other provision of Nevada law, and the law of any political subdivision of Nevada, except as otherwise provided in this chapter, it is lawful in this state and must not be used as a basis for prosecution or penalty by the state or a political subdivision of the state, and must not in this state be a basis for seizure or forfeiture of assets for persons 21 years of age or older too. Now, how you should read this is, these are the rights, or these are the privileges that we, the state, are allowing you to have if you are over the age of 21. And only inside this is the box you may operate inside of. Possess, use, consume, purchase, obtain, process, or transport marijuana paraphernalia, 1 ounce or less of marijuana, other than concentrated marijuana, or 1/8 of an ounce or less of concentrated marijuana. So, previously, 1 ounce or less of marijuana in the state, or 1/8 of an ounce or less of concentrated marijuana in the state of Nevada was a misdemeanor. Over 1 ounce is a felony. And it's a felony with, I believe, I want to say this right, 1.5 to 4 years is the penalty for over an ounce of marijuana. So 0.9 of an ounce of marijuana, now legal. previously, misdemeanor. 1.1 ounces of marijuana, felony before the law, felony now. Number 2, possess, cultivate, process, or transport not more than 6 marijuana plants for personal use, and possess the marijuana produced by the plants on the premises where the plants were grown. And you say, well, Vin, I can grow 6 plants. I can grow 6 plants and have the weed and keep the weed at my house, provided that A, cultivation takes place within a closet room, greenhouse, or other enclosed area that it is equipped with a lock or other security device that allows access only to persons authorized to access that area, and B, no more than 12 plants are possessed, cultivated, or processed at a single residence or upon the grounds of that residence at one time. Okay? You can assist another person who is 21 years of age or older in any of the acts. You cannot give, or you can give or otherwise deliver 1 ounce or less of marijuana, other than concentrated marijuana, or 1/8 of an ounce or less of concentrated marijuana without remuneration to a person, provided that the transaction is not advertised or promoted to the public. So, you can give away an ounce of weed for free if you don't advertise or promote it to the public, but you can't sell it. So, the old sales law, still illegal to sell. Illegal to sell any amount of marijuana if you don't have a retail license. And anyway, every marijuana sale in the past was never advertised or promoted to the public. So that's thanks for that. Like, you're not giving me anything with that one. So go ahead, next. Okay, so just so that people know the fees, in case you wanted to sell marijuana, initial issuance of a retail marijuana store, $20,000 fee. Every year renewal, $6,600. For a cultivation facility to grow, $30,000, and every year, $10,000 renewal fee. Product manufacturing, so that's like making edibles and whatnot, $10,000. Renewal license fee for that, $3,300. Distributor, $15,000. Renewal license for a distributor, $5,000. Marijuana testing facility, because now you have to have your weed tested before it can be sold, $15,000. A renewal, $5,000. Just to keep in mind that now it used to be a drain on the state. Now this is looking pretty good for the state. This does not include, obviously, the taxes and other fees that you'll need to pay. So go ahead forward. Okay, so this is what's interesting. Here are the violations and penalties, right? So you thought you could grow 6 plants, right? Well, here's the restrictions on personal cultivation. Except as otherwise provided in the medical marijuana statute, any person who, 1, cultivates marijuana within 25 miles of a retail marijuana store, unless the person is a marijuana cultivation facility or a person acting in this capacity as an agent of a marijuana cultivation facility, cultivates marijuana where they are visible from a public place by normal unaided vision, or 3, cultivates marijuana on property not in the cultivator's lawful possession or without the consent of the person in lawful physical possession of the property. So basically this, if you cultivate within 25 miles of a retail marijuana store, and or I can see your marijuana plants from a public place, that would be a public road, something like that, by normal unaided vision. Basically, I can look, I see a piece of your marijuana plant, is guilty of, for the first violation, a misdemeanor, punished by a fine of not more than $600. For a second violation, a misdemeanor punished by a fine of not more than $1,000. For a third violation, a gross misdemeanor, you're going to jail, county jail. And fourth, for a fourth or subsequent violation, a Category E felony, you're going to state prison for 1.5 to 4 years. Now, it doesn't say how they interpret that. Do 4 plants count as 4 violations? So what else? A person who smokes or otherwise consumes marijuana in a public place, in a retail marijuana store, or in a moving vehicle is guilty of a misdemeanor punished by a fine of not more than $600. So you thought weed was legal. You thought you were going to come to Nevada and you were going to hang out on the strip and you were going to smoke weed. 1, no you're not, because none of the casinos are allowing weed smoking. And 2, although you can take open bottles and open containers of alcohol and walk up and down the strip, If you're caught smoking weed on the Strip, $600. So if you want to smoke weed on the Strip, you're basically going to have to hide it exactly the same way that people are currently hiding it. A person under 21 years of age who falsely represents him or herself to be 21 years of age to obtain marijuana is guilty of a misdemeanor, just like alcohol. A person under 21 years of age who knowingly enters, loiters, or remains on the premises of a marijuana establishment shall be punished by a fine of not more than $500. And then there's chemical synthesis and manufacturer. Most of this is under 21 years of age, or someone who knowingly gives marijuana to a person under 18 of age, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go to this next thing here, Christian. Because it's, keep going. Is that it? Okay, so those are just the beginning of those laws. Now what we had was the tax department pass their regulations of exactly what you have to go through to get a license, to be licensed. So let's look at this NV tax. As you can see up there, this is the regulation. This is what got passed. This is what ended up getting passed on May 8th. A lot of contributions from the alcohol industry, by the way. You can see those. Those are public. It's T002-17 from the Nevada Tax Commission. 32 pages of regulations, in addition to already the vast amount of laws. Now, I've said this, Christian, I had said from the beginning, I said, you're not going to be able to smoke it. You think you're going to be able to smoke it, right? You're not going to be able to smoke in public. You're not going to be able to smoke driving. They're going to use the tax money to figure out how to test you when they pull you over for a DUI, right, which they currently don't have. Currently don't have a test for that. They have a test for alcohol, don't have a test for weed. They don't have the money to make a test for weed, to invest all that money. When they have the taxes, yes, they do. Also, as we saw in Colorado, they use the money to train how to spot stone drivers. They haven't trained cops how to spot stone drivers. Right? Because now it's not criminal, now it's civil.
Right.
See, that's great, because that's nothing but money coming to them. That's a ticket. It's a DUI. Massive fines. We know how that works. That's money coming into the state, and then you're going to have to go to some class. That, it's a kickback to the state for the class, all of that. Okay? What else? Can't sell it still as an individual person. That's still legal. I said you're not going to be able to grow it. Now, here's the interesting thing. Right now, I know people who grow here and have been growing for years. What does the law here say? Your shit can't be visible by the naked eye. It has to be in an enclosed space with a lock. Everybody growing here is already growing like that. I know a guy who built a fake area inside his house to grow that way. So you still have to grow clandestinely. You can't move more than an ounce out of your house at a time. Still. That's still illegal. And it's still completely illegal, and you're still under the cultivation laws against personal cultivation if it's within 25 miles of a retail store. Wow. Now, people are like, well, Vin, you just go 25 miles out. And I'm like, you don't fucking know Nevada. You want to see why it's 25 miles? We've basically got two population centers. We've got Clark County, which is Las Vegas, where we are, and you've got Washoe County and Carson City, which are basically right next to each other, which are up north on the border near Lake Tahoe. Those are our two centers. Besides that, it's empty desert. There's nothing.
And it takes about 25 minutes to get from like Summerlin area or
Dude,
North Las
well,
Vegas
let's do this.
To Green Valley.
Let's show what that 25 miles, huh? So long as you're 25 miles away, let's look at these Las Vegas distances. You see that line? That's from one corner of the Las Vegas Valley to the other corner of the Las Vegas Valley. It's exactly 25 miles. So that basically means if there is one retail establishment, even on the outskirts of Las Vegas, no one in Las Vegas can grow for personal use in all of Las Vegas. Not only that, you take that little guy, and if you imagine that there's, say, a retail spot in Summerlin, a retail spot in Henderson, now you're going to have to flip that 25 miles out. Outside of that, you're either dead in the wilderness of the mountains, you're on the Air Force, Nellis Air Force Base, you're in the Sloan Canyon National Conservation Area, or you're out in the middle of Lake Mead. There's nothing. You're in the middle of the wilderness. So you say, well, I'll go up to Reno. I'll go up to Carson City. That's fine. Let's look at that. No, you won't, because the distance from Reno, which is where the top thing is, to Carson City, which is the bottom thing, is 25 miles. So if there's one retail spot in either Reno or Carson City, nobody in either town can grow. You won't be able to smoke it. You won't be able to grow it.
Wow.
So, Christian, what we're really looking at is, what did you get? You got
Less freedom.
you can have weed on you, an ounce or less, but you got to smoke it in private. That's what you're already doing. The only thing that got any better is it went from a misdemeanor to not a misdemeanor. But any weed, dude, if you're carrying an ounce or less of weed and you're a weed smoker and you don't know how to be careful with that, put it in your trunk, whatever, keep it at home, only carry maybe a gram. Who's a weed smoker who's ever really been worried about even getting that fucking misdemeanor? Nobody. You got nothing. But what you get was, you get to pay for your own enslavement. Because now they have more money to crack down on the growers and on the smokers, on people who are selling without a license, and the retail stores are going to happily tell them who's selling without a license. The distributors and growers are going to happily rat out the people who are distributing and growing without a license. Happily, because they paid those high fees.
Yep.
That's what you get with legalization. So now let's talk about decriminalization, okay? So I was up at PorcFest. A bill was being presented, and I think that this is a prime example of why we need to be looking at these things. Bill was presented by Elizabeth Edwards Appel. I think she's been 3 or 4 years as a state representative, which they only get paid like $100 up there, but she was put in by the Free State Project. She's I think she's 29 years old.
Wow.
So she was like 26 or something like that when she first got elected, probably 25 when she started running. She's in a same-sex marriage, right? Her wife was there at the panel. She was unable to be there. And I went and I looked at this thing because I wanted to see, okay, you're going to decriminalize sex work. Let's see what your bill really does. Now, before we get into this, one thing that I want to say is principle. Principle. The principle with the weed is, and should be, and if you approach it with principle, you immediately see why. You look at this law and you say, this is bullshit, I'm not voting for this. The principle is, the government should have no place in telling people whether or not they can grow and consume a plant.
Yeah.
The cultivation and consumption of plants is a fucking human right. That you go back to the Bible.
Yeah.
That's Genesis. Our Adam was created to be a gardener. He was put in the garden to tend the garden. And when he was kicked from the garden, God told him, you will till the field, and you will live, and it will grow, and you will eat of the herbs of the field. It's who we are as humans.
This is great.
That's the principle. That's where you start. That's what you argue for. This is not about weed, because it's not. It's not just weed. It's every plant that's medicine and every plant that's food. It is a human right. If you own a piece of land or you have control of a piece of land, it is your right to grow plants there. As a human, if we take that away, like, I'm more concerned about taking the right to food away. And when you tell the government that it has a right to regulate what plants you can and can't grow, how you can grow them, where you can grow them on your private property, what plants you can and can't consume, you're walking down a dangerous path.
Yep.
You're walking down the most dangerous path that you could possibly walk down. And it's easy to see when you operate from principle, not preferences.
Right.
It's not about your preference for smoking weed. Because when you operate from principles, even the people who don't smoke weed can see, oh yeah, that's a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's clearly a bad idea.
It's the vampire.
It's the vampire.
You welcome the vampire right into your house.
Right in. So, when you operate from principle, though, you say, well, what should that law look like then? What should that law look like? Like, even if you were to do the bare minimum, I'll tell you what the law looks like. The law looks like this. It's legal to have an ounce of weed, and it's basically the government is going to get out of ounce of weed or less and 6 plants or less. That's it. If you have 6 plants or less, look, even if you want to say it shouldn't be for public nuisance reasons and for safety reasons too, right? It shouldn't be visible from a public place. Fine, people can operate like that. You can't smoke it in public? Fine. But we're not going to go after people for that. Grow the plant. Consume the plant.
Yeah.
If you're growing it and consuming it, like, it's render unto Caesar, right? If you want to sell it, we'll still make that illegal.
That would be considering that the plant is dangerous, you know, and there's been several studies and all kinds of information coming out.
Even more so.
Yeah.
But I would say this, the principle is, even if the plant is dangerous.
Right.
Like, that's the thing. You operate from principle, not preference. It doesn't matter what the plant is. Right? So let's take a look at this very, very interesting bill. Okay? This very interesting bill, I think, introduced with all the best intentions. Honestly, introduced in 2016, it died in committee. This is New Hampshire House Bill 1614, and it says, an act relative to the criminal penalty for prostitution. It was brought in by Representative Edwards, Bolden, and McGuire, I believe all 3 women. When I was on the panel, I was the only man on the panel, and it was a sort of a feminist panel. There were only 2 of us who had any experience in the industry. I found it interesting that they failed to include any women in the industry who actually worked in New Hampshire. I would think that that would be kind of somebody that you would want to bring in. But anyway, analysis. This bill legalizes consensual sex between consenting adults and makes any solicitation of sexual contact involving a person under 18 years of age or through the use of force or intimidation a felony. Okay, so Christian, let's go forward and let's take a look at what this bill was trying to do and what this bill was trying to change. Okay. I think the important thing is to look at what are the laws in New Hampshire now. And that's the part that struck out here. And I'll just read this off. So, a person this is how it existingly is. Prostitution and related offenses. A person is guilty of a misdemeanor if the person, A, solicits, agrees to perform, or engages in sexual contact as defined in the statutes, or sexual penetration as defined in the statutes, in return for consideration. So that's basically solicitation of prosecution, agreeing to or attempted prostitution, or actually prostitution itself. Okay, that's typical. B, induces or otherwise purposely causes another to violate subparagraph F. So inducing someone to prostitute. So basically, we're talking about pimping now, or pandering. That's pandering in most places. That's B. C, transports another into or within the state with the purpose of promoting or facilitating such other and engaging in conduct in violation of subparagraph A, so that's still under pimping and pandering. D, not being a legal dependent, incapable of self-support, knowingly is supported in whole or in part by the proceeds of violation of subparagraph A. So that's to say, if you knowingly are supported by the proceeds of a known prostitute, so that's actually, these are all pretty typical. E, knowingly permits a place under such person's control to be used for violation of subparagraph A, so basically running a brothel. Or F, pays, agrees to pay, or offers to pay another person to engage in sexual contact or sexual penetration with the payer or with another person. So this is kind of agreeing to pay a brothel owner or a pimp. How it currently exists is it says, a person is guilty of a Class B felony if such person violates the provisions, this is the existing law, violates the provisions of subparagraphs B, C, D, or E of paragraph 1. So basically, it's a Class B felony if a person is pimping and pandering and or running a brothel, and the violation, A, involves another person who is under the age of 18, or B, involved compelling another person by force or intimidation. This is pretty typical. So it's a misdemeanor for prostitution, pimping and pandering, running a brothel, and it's a felony, a Class B felony, currently, which is 3.5 years, 3.5 to 7 years, if you are basically pimping someone who's under the age of 18, or that pimp, if the pimping involves compelling another person by force or intimidation. The felony part, I think most people are like, yeah, that should be a felony. If you are a 25-year-old guy and you've picked up some 16-year-old girl and you're pimping her out, that's a fucking felony. I agree with that. Even though New Hampshire's consent, their age of consent is only 16. Right? This law, as it stands, okay. Now, a person under age of 18 is not subject to criminal prosecution, and someone who has been trafficked is not subject to prosecution. Okay. How did they, in seeking to quote-unquote decriminalize prostitution, what did they change? And this was where I had a huge problem, because I said, yo, somebody's either not paying attention or I don't know what your intent is here. And here's what it says. A person is guilty of a Class B, this is the new, what they wanted to change it to that died, thankfully. But supposedly this was a libertarian change. A person is, so all of the misdemeanors taken away for prostitution, pimping, and running a brothel, those are taken out of the criminal code. What has changed is, a person is guilty of a Class B felony if such a person solicits, agrees to perform, or engages in sexual contact as defined in the statutes or sexual penetration in return for consideration, and the violation, A, involves another person who is under the age of 18, or B, involve compelling another person by force or intimidation. So now, but mind you, person under the age of 18 cannot have a criminal thing, and a person who's trafficked, also that's a defense. So really this goes down to the solicitor. This goes down to the John. So a John who meets and pays a prostitute, even if this prostitute is being pimped, who is 16 years old, by this law now, would be the only person arrested and would have a felony charge. Not the pimp, not the brothel owner. B, it says, involve compelling another person by force or intimidation. Well, if you have sex with somebody with force or intimidation, that's rape, period. Right? You don't need a solicitation charge. So that's what I found so wild about this situation is, before this, the age of consent is 16 in New Hampshire, as it currently is. Let's say a 25-year-old guy meets a 16-year-old girl, or vice versa. They have sex, no money is exchanged. That's legal. Okay? under current law. If he pays her, that's prostitution, and he is guilty of a misdemeanor under current law for the prostitution. But she was over the legal age of consent. But how they wanted to change it is he would actually be guilty of a felony and have to register as a sex offender. A Class B felony and have to register as a sex offender, and that's supposed to be put in by a libertarian.
Wow.
And if she was being pimped, the pimp gets off scot-free. It's not a crime anymore.
Oh, shit.
And if the real issue is that you want to protect, like, isn't that the whole thing? The whole thing is like underage girls being pimped by guys. Isn't that what supposedly you're really trying to protect and stop? Mm-hmm. This actually legalizes it. It takes all the pimping and pandering laws off the books. Legalizes the whole thing, but it doesn't fully legalize it. And here's why. Go to the next one. So, this is the felonious sexual assault. It says, includes the offense often referred to as statutory rape, which involves sexual penetration of a person between the ages of 13 and 16, when the age difference between the actor and the person is 4 years or more. The legal age of consent in New Hampshire is 16. So, prostitution, 16-year-old prostitution, legal, state of New Hampshire. Right now, as I said, a John who would be caught, a customer who would be caught guilty of a misdemeanor. What the supposedly libertarian change is supposed to be guilty of a felony and register as a sex offender, even though he had sex that was completely legal and consensual. But he paid for it. Not exactly decriminalization. Let's go to the next. Now, one thing that I want to say, and Christian, one thing that I want to say about this is I don't actually agree with that age of consent. I'm not saying I agree with that age of consent, but what I'm saying is that is the age of consent that the people of New Hampshire have agreed to. And if you own your body, which this is the principle, if you own your body, if you really own your body, the principle is you can give it away or you can sell it. Mm-hmm. Who owns it?
You do.
Does the state own your sexuality or do you own it? If you own a car, you can give your car away, you can sell your car. Mm-hmm. If you own a piece of jewelry, you can give that piece of jewelry away, you can sell that jewelry. If you own your body and you own your sexuality, you can give it away or you can sell it. It's not the state's business. Mm-mm. That is the principle. This violates the principle. Now here's the other part. And this is why we have to be very, very careful. What we have to be careful is, although it took the prostitution and the pandering out of state law, that particular bill does nothing to address the fact that the city councils in the revised statutes of New Hampshire, Title 3, Chapter 47, the city council shall have the power to make all such statutory and needful bylaws as towns, and the police officers of towns and engineers or fire wards by law have power to make and to annex penalties not exceeding $1,000 for the breach thereof, and may make, establish, publish, alter, modify, amend, and repeal ordinances, rules, regulations, and bylaws for the purposes stated in this section. So, up to a fine of $1,000, the cities and towns, which is 207, by the way, in just New Hampshire, 207 different jurisdictions, all have the right within their jurisdiction to create crimes as outlawed here. Now, you take it out of state law. Have you really decriminalized it? Have you really? Well, let's see. Go to the next one. Because, well, what do they have the rights to? One is general purpose. The third one, disorderly houses and gambling. To suppress and restrain disorderly houses and houses of ill fame, gambling houses and places, billiard tables, 9 or 10 pin alleys or tables and ball alleys, and all playing of cards, dice, and other games of chance, to restrain and prohibit all descriptions of gambling and fraudulent devices, and to authorize the destruction and demolition of all instruments and devices used for the purpose of gaming. So it outlaws gambling, and it also outlaws these houses of ill fame. So, running a brothel was decriminalized on a state level, but what is a house of ill fame? So Christian, let's go to this next one. House of ill fame is a brothel. So every single city now, you just gave them new power to decide, okay, we'll make it a fine of up to $1,000 if you're running a brothel. And they can decide, a lot of places will do things like, for every day that you run it, it's a new offense. And then what happens if you don't pay that $1,000? Well, now you're going away. Now you've got a bench warrant. Now you're going away. So you've now given this power to the towns and the cities. You haven't actually legalized anything. Furthermore, so that's the brothels. Well, what about just prostitution? Go forward. Well, that's number 13, vagrants, obscene conduct, to restrain and punish vagrants, mendicants, street beggars, strolling musicians, and common prostitutes, and all kinds of immoral and obscene conduct. Do we have one more on this, Christian, or no? Okay, so dude, what has this done? It has not decriminalized anything. Mm-hmm. It's put the regulation of prostitution in the hands of 200 different jurisdictions that can decide as they want what constitutes prostitution.
Wow.
By their own little village standards. They can fine you $1,000 for it. Funny enough, the only thing that this looks like it really made legal completely and unregulated is pimping.
Weird.
Is pimping. And so for me, that was what was funny, was here I am sitting with supposedly feminists.
Yeah.
I've even got like a purple-haired social justice warrior who was previously giving a talk about like trans rights, which I'm all about. Mm-hmm. But I'm mentioning this and she's shaking her head at me like I'm wrong.
Oh, shit.
And I'm like, are you not listening to me?
Yeah.
Like, why is the only advocate for women up here, the only one who's pointing out that the only people that you privileged in this are pimps, why am I the man up here doing that?
Yeah.
Isn't that like, isn't that your job? Aren't you avowed feminists? Mm. So what did they decide? Let's punish the Johns. Pimps go free. That's how they changed the law. Punish the Johns, pimps go free. If you want to start pimping 16-year-olds,
why would they
those
do
are your
something
representatives.
like that?
Why would they do something like that? Because principle.
Yeah.
They think it looks good. They think that it's like, well, I'm here, so I need to do something, and this is my issue. Sex trafficking and sex work is work. Here are the two principles of this, okay? First principle is, when it comes specifically to sex work, you own your body.
Yep. You
can give it away, and your labor. See, this is bigger than prostitution.
Yeah.
This is about labor.
Well, now we're getting to the roots. We're getting to the...
That's the principle.
Yeah.
The principle is the root.
Right.
And at the root of it is, and this is how it doesn't die. Because the Republican, one of the ways that it died was the Republican leader of the House, one of the quotes that he said about this thing was, well, society's not ready for that yet. Yeah, you don't sell it like that. Mm-hmm. You sell it and you say, no. The same reason that you think taxes should be lower or don't exist at all is the same reason for this. Why? Because you own your body and you own your labor, and the government doesn't get to say that you have to give them something because you labored. If you really want to do this and you want to act on principle, you take it out, not because it has anything to do with women, not because it has anything to do with prostitution, not because it's some special issue. You take it out because it's the state regulating someone else's body. Mm-hmm. You take it out because it's the state regulating a voluntary contract and interaction between two people. You take it out for the same reason that I'm sure, and the same principle that underlies why she's in a same-sex marriage, why she would be, and why I am in support of same-sex marriage. Because a marriage is a voluntary contract between two people.
Yeah.
And it's not the state's job, and it's not the state's place to be determining who can and cannot make a contract and what that contract can be about when it's between two consenting adults, period. Principle.
Yep. And now we're seeing the matrix with this because it's the same thing with the weed. You know, it goes full circle. It's the same thing.
Well, see, when you start viewing it as principle,
Mm-hmm.
then you start to see, oh, it's all the same thing.
Yeah.
It's, oh, the state is using violence to step in between and coerce voluntary interactions between people.
Mm-hmm.
That is their human right. You have a right to grow plants. You have a right to interact with other people. How far are we on this before Tim? Good. We got it done in an hour.
Yeah.
Which brings me to this. This is what I wanted to speak about. We'll talk about this. Hopefully we can get into some of this Russian stuff because it's super interesting. You know, I was thinking about this all the way back the plane from New Hampshire, is we talk about legalization. We talk about decriminalization. But I'm going to suggest right here on this show that really we're talking about the wrong things. Because neither one of them is the libertarian position, I think. I've been working through this, and I think my next book will be focused on this idea. When I say, or when someone says, America is the best country in the world, or America is the freest country in the world, what is it that they're referring to? Tell me. Like, what are the freedoms that they're talking about?
Well, I would say the Bill of Rights and...
There you go. That's the answer.
Yeah.
Like, what makes America exceptional?
Right.
The Bill of Rights. Right? That's where American exceptionalism comes from. Now, First Amendment is speech, assembly, religion. These are almost the religious bedrock of being an American, of being a patriot, right? When you fly the red, white, and blue, it's pretty much people are talking about the first two amendments. I mean, I think 3 and 4 are pretty damn important. I think 4, like no warrantless searches, is people need to be focused more. But freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, that's the First Amendment. That was huge. That was groundbreaking. But what's the first words of the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law. It said, the First Amendment says, the federal government, which the 14th Amendment extended to the states, you can make no law abridging the freedom of speech. No law restricting speech, restricting the press, restricting religion. You can make no law. It's not, you can put it to a vote and you can put some regulations and restrictions. You can make no law. That's not legalization. And that's not decriminalization. In fact, it's like the opposite of legalization.
Yeah.
So I was playing around and trying to figure out, well, what is that? Because we need to be talking about that because that's what makes America great. When I talk about being a conservative, about going back, I'm that conservative. I want to go back to that. What's that idea? We haven't had one of those laws in a long time. The blockchain law that's here, where it says it's basically that. Local government can make no law about the blockchain.
Yeah.
What is that? What is that? That's not decriminalization because it wasn't criminal. It's not legalization because it takes it out of law. It takes it away from the realm of law. You can't touch it. I'm calling it enshrinement because people say our rights are enshrined in the Bill of Rights.
Interesting.
We need to be talking about enshrinement. So what would enshrinement of marijuana look like? The state of Nevada shall pass no law infringing upon the people's rights to grow and consume plants.
Wow.
We need to start looking at these rights in the way that we look at gun rights. Hands off my guns. Hands off my plants. Hands off my labor. The state of New Hampshire shall make no law infringing the ability of two citizens or of citizens to interact in a nonviolent and voluntary manner. That's the principle. That's what we need to be fighting for. If we're gonna be active in government, we need to start viewing ourselves as libertarians, as liberty-minded people, we need to start viewing ourselves as doctors. If this is a cancer, if government's a cancer, if the body politic is sick, you need to start viewing yourself as a doctor.
Yeah.
And that means, look, the Hippocratic Oath is do no harm. Sometimes the only way to do no harm is to do nothing. Sometimes the best thing a doctor can do is nothing. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the worst thing a doctor can do is, well, it is the worst thing. If you're not a trained surgeon, if you've only been a lawmaker in a state that doesn't take lawmaking very seriously for 3 years, and you think you're going to go in and make changes to laws regarding the world's oldest profession, that's a lot of arrogance and a lot of hubris. Mm-hmm. Are you a doctor? Are you a surgeon? Can you address the problem? Can you go in and cut the cancer out? And when you cut it out, you need to cut it all out.
Right.
And you need to not leave a piece of gauze in there. That piece of gauze that you leave in there can kill the patient faster than the cancer.
More problems. Yeah.
You need to be ready. You need to be prepared. You need to know how to do the surgery. You need to go in and you need to make the cut, and you need to take out what needs to be taken out, and then you need to care for the patient afterwards. And we need to start looking at ourselves that way. Mm-hmm. If you can't do that, do not participate in government.
Interesting. Yeah, I was thinking about the laws and these kind of like reflexive type things that are happening. And going back to from a principle standpoint, I see the problem as this: like, as an individual looking at these things, you're looking at them from an outside perspective, and you're going out there saying, I can get away with this much stuff.
Right.
Instead of saying, what's the right thing for me to do, looking inside.
That's right.
What's the right thing for me to do? No, it's not what can I get away with, or how far can I push it, or even like most people would rebel against those types of things just because it's our nature, like we want to do, you know.
Right.
But instead of looking inside and saying, is this right or wrong, and should I do it or should I not, according to my principles, my belief system.
And it's to start to present principles. It's to start, like, you know, we talked about this last week when it's like, it's tricky until you have the principles. When you have the principles, it's like dead simple.
Right. Yeah.
It's so simple. Mm-hmm. So simple. Like, and that's the crazy part about it, is that it's like, no, you start to see like, wait, we don't need all these laws.
No. It's interesting because this last week I was really thinking about the laws, the universal principles that cannot be escaped, you know? And even if you don't know those things, they're still happening, you know? And they'll come around and you'll start to know them.
Well, there's a Bastiat quote that I used in my presentation that I didn't record at Porkfest. And he said, it's not that government, it's not that life, liberty, and property were given by government through laws. It's that there's something about life, liberty, and property that existed that was the reason that men wrote laws in the first place. The principles are there, and you build the laws around the principles. It's not the other way around.
Right. Yep.
But most politicians get into politics because they want power. Mm-hmm. And power is about preferences. So you throw your principles to the side so that you can get elected, because most people don't know what principles are. And the worse and worse that the education system gets, the less and less people know anything about principles.
Yep.
It's this feedback loop. And so I think that, like, that's really what I'm going to start personally focusing on, because it just makes things easier. And especially now that it's like, wow, we're at a point where we actually could start, the culture wants to have legal weed, or it wants to be able to consume these plants, wants to be able to do this, and we're getting less. It's getting more restricted.
Yeah.
I mean, in you imagine in 50 years, like, weed will be as restricted as alcohol. It will be the same special interests. It used to be, I mean, alcohol, for crying out loud. Noah.
Yeah.
The flood ended. I mean, these are people, you talk about, it's not just random that the people who wrote these stories and that these stories lived, it's not just random that the first thing that Noah did when the flood waters receded was he planted a vineyard and he made wine. He didn't plant wheat. He didn't plant a fucking tomato. He didn't go and walk his sheep around. He planted a vineyard and he made wine. The ability for the average man to make his own alcohol is written into our very cultural DNA. It's been taken away. And the more you don't have principles, and the more that you go preferences over principles, the more that gets taken away. Because today it's your preference that you give the state the power. And tomorrow it's not. Because the party changes and you gave them the power to control what plants you can and can't grow. That's not their power. Don't give it to them. They only have it because you give it to them. We got from Moen. Let's get Tim Moen on the line. Let's go to break, and then we'll do counter markets. While we're at break, why don't you go ahead and bring him up?
Got it.
Thank you, sir. Welcome back to the Vin Armani Show. We are streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Vin Armani. Also on Twitter and Periscope at Vin Armani is my handle there. And on the Facebook page of our content partner, Activist Post. That's facebook.com/Activist Post. So before we get into our guest, it is hot in here, Christian. I want to just have a little conversation, as always, about counter markets. Oh man, it's going great. The people who are subscribing, obviously you're getting value out of our newsletter. We're loving writing this thing. I'm loving talking about the things that we talk about here on the show, but in our articles we get a chance to go really deep. And I think that we're providing a lot of value. If you have not checked out Counter Markets yet, Trends and Strategies for Maximum Freedom, it's how to live by principle and get rich doing it. Because principles are sustainable. And when we build a business, when we build an enterprise, the most important thing is you want it to be sustainable. You want it to operate under principles. And we go inside of the latest developments in technology, in business, in libertarian thought, really. And we tell you where the opportunities are for you to make some money, because there's nothing wrong with making some money. There's nothing wrong with being able to make a living through the execution of your principles. You can go to countermarkets.com and get your first issue for free now. It's the whole issue. It's this month's issue. It's 100% free. We know that you're going to want to subscribe, so we have no problem giving it away. So go check it out, countermarkets.com. So speaking of living by principles, I'm very, very excited for our guest today. I'd like to welcome Tim Moen to the show. Where we got him? There he is. Tim Moen is a firefighter, paramedic, business owner, filmmaker, volunteer, and politician from Canada, and he is the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Tim Moen, welcome to the Vin Armani Show.
Hey, it's great to be here, Vin. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening to your conversation there and digging the passion and the rage against the machine kind of vibe going on.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it. We have a lot in common in that regard. I have to tell you, when I met you, you were here in Vegas, and we got a chance to sit down and talk. And I'm naturally skeptical of politicians. I think by the end of this, people will realize that you're not the average politician, for sure. But I have to say, I was impressed and inspired by your story and by also, I think, the principled stand that you take on a lot of issues. I don't actually think that we have anybody like you, unfortunately, in the U.S. Libertarian Party. And I think one of the things that really stands apart, and that people know that I'm an anarchist. You expressed to me when we met that you, from a principled standpoint, consider yourself to be an anarchist, but yet here you are, the leader of the Libertarian Party in Canada, ran for prime minister. You ran in 2 elections, right? Is that right?
Yeah, well, I was thrown into a by-election,
Right.
Very quickly after I made the commitment to try this thing. And, like you say, it took a while to convince me to do that because, as a kind of self-identified anarcho-capitalist, I thought running for office was antithetical to everything I believed in, basically.
So what was it that changed? Or maybe you could tell the story. Walk us through that process of how an anarcho-capitalist becomes the leader of a political party in a Western nation.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd story. So, I'd been a kind of a liberty activist, I guess, for the better part of 5 or 6 or 7 years. I lived up in this community called Fort McMurray. It's in the heart of the Canadian oil sands. And of course, the Canadian oil sands are a hotbed of geopolitical debate worldwide. And so we constantly had environmentalists flying into town. I owned a film production company on the side. My main job was as a firefighter up there, but every firefighter has a side gig, and film production was my side gig. And so we had activists like Neil Young and Daryl Hannah flying into Fort McMurray to basically look at all the ugly stuff that the oil sands were doing to the environment. And so, I was a very big community booster, and I was a big booster of the oil sands. I think that generally speaking, overall, bringing that energy to the world is important. And I think there's a lot of good things going on in Fort McMurray that are worth talking about and sharing with the world. So when Neil Young and Daryl Hannah came to town, they contracted me to help out with their production. And I was happy to tell whatever story they wanted to tell. They were my client, but of course, my goal was to show them a side of the oil sands that they might not have considered. For example, the fact that there was an eco carnival in town that weekend called Sustainable that ran off used cooking oil and had a solar powered stage. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to get Neil Young on this solar powered stage singing a song in the heart of the dirty tar sands, to kind of, as an artist, that was interesting to me, because here we are in so-called dirty industrial oil country, and here's Neil Young singing a song on a solar-powered stage. Why is that? How did that happen? Here's where we're at. Here's where we're going, and it's all because of the wealth and the capitalism that is being generated there. And all the environmental solutions that are coming out of Fort McMurray are amazing. We could spend an episode just talking about that. But anyways, Neil Young, of course, didn't want to do any of that. He just wanted to shoot all the ugly, oil slicks and whatever he could find that kind of told his narrative, and that's fine. But then he went on to Washington, D.C., and he used terms like genocide and compared our community to Hiroshima after the A-bomb, and he was using pretty strong hyperbolic rhetoric, and I took exception to that. And I wrote an article that went viral, got picked up by the Huffington Post, basically talking about, Neil's hypocrisy. Here he was burning a lot of energy, producing a lot of carbon, and doing something that he thought he was good in the world. And I thought that perfectly described what Fort McMurray was doing and what the people there were doing. They were trying to advance technology, innovation, create more efficient ways to produce energy. And that's exactly what Neil was saying he was doing, but of course he was there to preach and condescend. So I wrote this article. It went, it got national coverage, and some libertarians noticed that there was a very libertarian theme to the article. I pointed out how Neil's 36-year-old son, who has cystic fibrosis and was given a life expectancy of 16, was now 36 and was able to travel around with Neil with round-the-clock nursing. And you can trace his flourishing in life and his ability to extend his life back to the dirty smokestacks of the Industrial Revolution that Neil was now cutting down and complaining about and demonizing. And I thought that something needed to be said about this. And so, these libertarians noticed me, and they reached out to me and said, listen, we noticed your libertarian theme here. Would you be interested in running for office under the Libertarian Party? And of course, right away, as a anarchist, I said, absolutely not. There's no way I'm doing that. That is antithetical to everything I believe. In fact, I had just written an article a few months ago explaining why voting might be borderline immoral. And so, no, I'm not going to do that. But, one guy in particular just kept bringing up Ron Paul and saying, listen, I get that Ron Paul didn't pull any legislative levers and shrink government, but are you saying that him standing on that soapbox, that political stage, and talking about principles of liberty was harmful? You don't think that benefited the world, benefited the political climate, and might pay off in the long run? And I had to admit, I couldn't argue that, because millions of people were brought the message of liberty by Ron Paul. I have to believe that will pay off. If that doesn't pay off, everything we're doing here, Vin, is for naught. If we can't use our words to talk to people and have a conversation with them and change hearts and minds and bring them these principles, then the inevitability of civil war becomes basically unavoidable. So I agreed to run for Parliament, and I figured, okay, I've got a year and a half. Our next general election is 2015, and this was January of 2014. And so I figured I have a year and a half to figure out how to be a politician. What do I need to do? What is the process? But literally 2 days after I made this commitment, my member of Parliament resigned, and so I was thrown into an immediate by-election. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I just kind of put out feelers to see who would be willing to help me. And we started throwing memes against the wall. And the one meme that kind of stuck was, I want gay married couples to be able to protect their marijuana plants with guns. And that went around the world. It got me interviews on Fox News. CNN interviewed me. Our version of The Daily Show in Canada, a show called This Hour is 22 Minutes, made fun of me. And so I was kind of thrust into the spotlight, just kind of fumbling around blindly. It turned out that one of the kids that was helping me, one of my team members that was helping me produce these memes, was a 15-year-old kid in the basement of his mom's house. I didn't know that till after, I assumed he was just another adult like me. So I had to make sure he was getting permission from his parents to undermine the state with me here. But no, so from that, just 2 months later, we had our party convention that we have every 2 to 3 years. And I was nominated for leader of the party, and I won. So I went from writing an article about how voting was immoral to running for Prime Minister of Canada in a space of about 6 months. I've been wrong about a lot of things in my past, and this was one of the things that I changed my mind on, again, about the idea of political action and standing on that political stage, not saying no to it, because I think now that it's pretty dumb to say no to a stage. If you're an atheist, for example, and you think that maybe a particular religion is harmful, you don't say no to the pastor of the church that's preaching these harmful beliefs when he invites you to stand at the pulpit and deliver a sermon to his congregation. You take that opportunity to say what you want to say, and maybe help disabuse people of a harmful belief system. And so that's kind of how I look at politics.
I think when you were talking about Neil Young, I think it resonated with me, because as I was telling Christian earlier, I was just up in New Hampshire at Porcupine Freedom Fest, and one of the things that stood out to me was, I'm very much, and one of the reasons why I am an anarchist, why I'm an agorist, is that I really do hate the left-right politics. And I think that it's something that a principled libertarian, like when you and I sat down and spoke, I think that you bring in things, certainly socially, from the left in terms of a level of openness of wanting people. And I mean, look, it's that your meme is like, it hits it. And that was something that I noticed up at PorcFest. And as I was telling him, you got these Second Amendment gun rights guys walking around, and you've got like purple-haired social justice warriors there as well. And it is this preferences versus principles, and maybe I'd love to get your thoughts on this and where you think Canada is at like this. I do think that the biggest sort of selling point for Liberty is really to sell people on preferences. Is to say, look, you have these different preferences, and I'd like you to be able to express these different preferences, just like I'd like this person to express them. I just don't want to put a gun in the room, unless it's a peacefully owned private gun, then you could have as many as you want. I don't want to put the gun of the state in the room to enforce your neighbor's preferences against you, or to enforce yours against them, because that switches on a dime. Maybe if you could talk about how that even has happened very recently in Canada, because it seems like it goes left, right. And where does the Libertarian Party stand on that?
Yeah, well, we are probably a few years behind you guys in the States in terms of our political climate. What we're observing in the States is starting to spill over here, which is hyper division, right? It's a fracturing and a partisanship. And so now the left isn't so much about some kind of positive virtues or values that they're concerned about. They're more that they define themselves as anti-right or anti-fascist or whatever, right? And on the right, it's the same way. There's no real sense of there's no real nucleus that they're circulating around of positive beliefs, of virtues or whatever. They're simply anti-left. We're whatever the left is not. And so this is increasing, and it's rapidly accelerating, I think. And so these are kind of very scary, chaotic times in terms of where the trend lines are going. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason that people are becoming more and more at odds with each other, right? And you can look at it through all the different levels of organization in society, right from the individual to the family to the nation state. We're seeing the same type of thing emerge, and that is people being at each other's throats. So I don't think it's any accident that, for example, you have men's rights activists versus third wave feminists. At the same time, you have divorced couples fighting and bickering, toxically against each other in divorce proceedings. At the same time, you have, this hyper partisan divide between the left and the right. I think it's all part of the same kind of fractal. And the way I tend to look at politics of left and right is, that if you think about the things that the left kind of historically has been concerned about, they're concerned about things that moms are concerned about, right? They're concerned about making sure the least of these is looked after, making sure and encouraging sharing in the family, ensuring there are endless founts of empathy if someone gets hurt, and they're concerned about that nurturing spirit, right? That's their primary concern. And they're also concerned about caretaking the environment around them. Like they create a beautiful space for the family to live in. Kind of historically, fathers have been those people that have their heads on a swivel, right? They're vigilant about external threats. They're concerned about getting external resources into the family. They're concerned about boundary enforcement. That's where your mom starts and you stop, mister. You don't cross that line. And so I think these are very complementary kind of focuses. If you want a healthy system, right? Whether that's a healthy family system or a healthy system in an organization or in a society. And the problem is that when you put that gun in the room and you create a zero-sum game, and you keep raising the stakes, you keep raising and raising the stakes, and saying that not only is one side going to win, but the other side is going to lose, and badly. And if that other side wins, man, watch out, you're in for it. And so it becomes a struggle for literal survival. And so everyone is scrambling for that gun. The stakes have never been higher. If the left gets in, you can be sure that the right is going to be oppressed. If the right gets in, you can be sure that the left is going to be oppressed. And this is a natural consequence of that, this division of the family, this division of society. And so, I like to offer folks a different way of looking at it, and that is that we need kind of both of those energies in society, and the only way we live together in a society is if our bedrock value is that of liberty. If we all respect each other, respect each other's property rights, then those kind of we get positive unintended consequences rather than negative unintended consequences. And we have these two kind of groups of people working together. We have one group of people focused on creating kind of a safe, protected space, and within that space we have people, and this is kind of the Burkean view, kind of Burkean conservative view, right? Edmund Burke talked about these little platoons, right? That society is best ordered through the little platoons. And by that, he means the family, the church, charities, local businesses. And so when you don't have a big overarching government, order tends to emerge from these little platoons rather than this disorder that emerges from a top-down kind of view of the world. So that's kind of how I approach politics. It's not that I reject the left-right paradigm. I think that those legitimately exist. It's just that whether you are concerned about left-wing things or right-wing things tells me more about your family of origin than it does about your political philosophy. And so that's kind of how I look at that.
I want to talk to you about the state of the libertarian. Obviously, the Libertarian Party in the U.S. is the forebear of sort of the others, and the at least at one point the philosophical touchstone. I feel like perhaps in other places it's actually a little more pure than it is now. You came in because you were essentially asked to come on, asked to participate. You were somebody who your views already reflected the principles that the Libertarian Party was trying to push forward, and that you represented somebody that the Libertarian Party would like to have actually leading with the message, and I think it's clear why. I want to talk about your feeling, and obviously I don't want to call anybody out by name, but one of the things that has disenchanted me with the U.S. Libertarian Party, I feel that now especially would be the time when the Libertarian Party should be absolutely killing it in the U.S. They're not, and I think that perhaps one of the reasons why is because, at least from my view, and you can tell me whether I'm right on this or if I'm on point or not, the Libertarian Party seems to be an outlet for people who want to be involved in politics and want attention, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about in terms of the types of bills that get put forward by the Libertarian candidates who do wind up in some position of power. Should we be, as small L libertarians and as people who might be thinking about trying to have a little more influence politically, how should we be approaching looking at candidates? Should we be first going out and trying to find candidates like you? Should we be trying to mold the candidates who want to step forward? Should we be actively rejecting some of those candidates who seem to just be there to get the attention? And if any of those things, how do we judge? How do we judge who's a good candidate? What are the things that you look for? I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is a great topic, and it's one of obviously that's hotly debated. One of the problems of working, it's not just the Libertarian Party; it's with any group of libertarians, is that we're very individualistic, right? So libertarians tend to be people who have been on the outside of in-groups growing up, I've noticed, and so they're in a kind of unique position to be able to objectively look at a group of people and say, well, that's bullshit and that's bullshit, and I'm not going to conform to that, and then they come across the philosophy of libertarianism and they realize that yeah, I'm justified in my individualist stance here. And so part of the problem, our greatest strength is that we're very good at looking at systems. And actually, Jonathan Haidt, who's a psychologist, I believe, did one of the only kind of comprehensive personality studies of the different political types. And one of the things he found was that libertarians are very systems-oriented people, right? We're very analytical, we're very rational, we're very intelligent, and we have we are low on the empathy scale, which means that basically we're able to take our toys and leave at a much sooner point in time when it comes to group work and that sort of thing. So, this is something that I think can be overcome, right? So, as a firefighter, we have squabbles in the firehouse, and when there's drama and there's things that go on, that might look like what you see in any of these groups like a Libertarian Party. But when it comes to actually fighting the fire, all those things get put aside, and we have each other's backs, and we are focused on the fire. And I think that, one of the things I wish is that government and all the damage it does, it kills far more people and ruins far more life than fire. It's a far more destructive, chaotic force than fire, but it's not immediately visible. And I wish it was, because I think that would go a long way to helping people understand the value of teamwork. But that's one of the biggest problems, is that libertarians are particularly have a particular objection to working as a team, right? They will, if there's a minor disagreement, they'll rail against that, till they're blue in the face, and then they'll just pack up and leave the team, right? And so one of my goals, and I'm just about to publish a blog about small L leadership for big L libertarians that talks about the principles of leadership, that we're all leaders, that we can all, that we're all in this together, and people that, and at certain points it's important to have team cohesion, to have team loyalty. And the sooner libertarians learn that, the better. I felt bad for Gary Johnson. Like, he's not, he's not a pure libertarian, and he certainly has a lot of quirks and foibles, and he's not perfect, and he makes mistakes, and he might not be who a lot of us would choose to be our spokesperson, but he was in that position. That was his position, and what I saw in the Libertarian Party was different than what I saw in the other parties, and it had less to do with leadership, I think, and more to do with the ability of libertarians to be team members, to be followers, for lack of a better word, and get behind a leader. And so when I'm on the fire ground, I might not agree with everything my incident commander is doing. I might even think some of his decisions are stupid, but I support him, because I know if I don't, my team is not going to be successful. I undermine our mission. I actually put the team in danger. And so unity is very important when you're engaged in a firefighting operation. It's very important when it comes to a battle. And so Trump and Hillary said ridiculous things, far more ridiculous even than Gary Johnson. And yet you never saw a Trump supporter throwing Trump under the bus, or a Hillary supporter throwing Hillary under the bus. But you saw that happen all the time with libertarians. And I think that maybe has to do with our personality type than anything. So, but it's not something that we should shy away from or be defensive about. It's something we should look in the mirror and say, look, I don't have to be that way. And I've learned this the hard way. I mean, over the years, I've been very abrasive, very troll-like, and I'd love to pick fights, and I'd love to bash people over the head with my logic and reason and explain to them why they're wrong and put them down. And eventually I realized that wasn't serving my own needs, right? And so what serves my needs is working in a group with people towards a common goal, and understanding that other people, I'm not going to agree with them, I might not even totally like them, or think they might be fairly weak team members, but yet I'm not going to throw them under the bus. I got their back, and I hope that other people feel the same way about me and their teammates. And so I think, to me, that's a big thing. So when I look at candidates, there's definitely stages that you have to go through. So right now we're trying to get a full slate of candidates. We had, I think, the largest number of candidates in our party's history. In the last election, we had our most successful results. I think we had 73 candidates or something like that. But a full slate is like 320 candidates right across the country. And so there are two schools of thought here. One is, we look for a handful of kind of star candidates, people that you can put in front of mainstream media. They're not going to embarrass the party. Or you can go with a full slate of candidates at all costs, which means that you're going to have, lower quality candidates in a lot of areas, and maybe some people that are downright abhorrent when they're put on in front of a camera or something like that. And my personal view is, look, right now it all depends on what your goal is. And so my goal right now is to fill a full slate of candidates. And so I tend to think, let's attract as many candidates as possible. Let's get them on there, even if they're not quality candidates. My job is to basically outshine them and be the face of the party and make it very difficult for people to dismiss the ideas of liberty. And then over time, as we get more popular, we'll be able to attract more quality candidates to the party. And we look at a very decentralized kind of approach that we want, particular ridings and districts to select their own candidates. And I think that's a good way to move forward. Let decentralize the approach and kind of let local districts choose their candidates. And then when you have a candidate, get behind them, even if they look like abhorrent people. I mean, they're the person that has the courage to stand on that stage, even though their voice is shaking and their knees are knocking, and say the things that want to say, that you want said. And so, either step up and run and do something, take some responsibility to change the world, to change yourself, clean your room, get your stuff in order, and then step up on that stage, or support a candidate, but don't constantly undermine them and detract from them. That's very hard for us to do, but I think we're finding that gear. I see a lot of positive things in the Libertarian Party down in the States. I know there's a lot of leaders, I'm thinking of guys like Michael C. Pickens in Washington, who goes around and preaches this stuff and talks about this kind of positive message of support and team unity and building each other up and having each other's backs if you're an organization with each other. And I think that's an important message to have.
So, I mean, there's the party and the movement, obviously. And I think that there's a lot of, they come together at a lot of places. And I definitely noticed that this weekend when I was up in New Hampshire. One thing that stuck out to me was, I was really watching the demographics, because it was a very, very mixed group. I'd say 50-50 men and women, which is very rare, I think, for a Liberty conference. There were tons of families, tons of kids, and I was paying attention to the demographics and how they would switch as people, depending on the topic that was being discussed in the main pavilion. And then I tweeted something yesterday that was sort of what I brought out of it as a whole, and that was, I see. You bring women to libertarianism through ideas that revolve around sort of bodily autonomy. And you bring men to libertarianism through ideas that revolve around property rights. But fundamentally, right? That's pretty much what I saw. When there was somebody who was up there talking about the value of the autonomy of the body, women would flock over. When there was somebody up there talking about how to keep control of your property, the men seemed to flock over. And clearly, people come to this movement for different reasons, and the States is going to be different than Canada, the concerns that we have. Where are those sort of pivot points for Canadians that you see that may be specific to Canada, that are not really things that are big in terms of bringing Canadians as versus bringing Americans over there? Or is there really not that much difference between the sort of the pivot points for the party?
Yeah, I don't think there are a tremendous amount of pivot points there, but for sure there is a difference between men and women, evolutionarily, and psychologically. Despite what social justice warriors would like us to believe, that this is all just kind of constructed from our imagination or something like that. There are good biological reasons, and I touched on them earlier, right? It just has to do with division of labor, and when you have a family and your goal is to raise kids and to do that sort of thing, you kind of have different roles. So it's not surprising that men might be interested in property rights. We're out there gathering resources, we're defending the property, we're making sure the family is safe. So those are kind of the areas we're fixating on. And women are ensuring, of course, they want bodily autonomy. I mean, that's women's rights, right? I mean, for historically, women have been treated as property, as objects, and so anything that projects that, empowers them to have autonomy and to say, no, I'm not an object, I'm another human being, is probably going to be attracted attractive to women. So, I think you're right. And I think, it's important that we understand the audience we're talking to. And so anytime I'm speaking to an audience, I want to understand what language they're hearing, what language they're speaking. And the left tends to have a different language than the right. And so, if I'm talking about the drug war, to the leftist, I'm talking about oppressors versus oppressed. Like, why are we marginalizing and inflicting the same type of trauma on these people that led to the addiction to begin with? Right. On the right, I'm talking, they're very concerned. They see the world in terms of barbarism versus civility, and so they're concerned about law and order. And so I talk about how crime drops and how order prevails when we don't incentivize giant drug cartels to provide people with these substances they want. And a libertarian is very simple. We see the world in terms of authoritarian versus freedom. And so we just say, well, who owns your body and who has a right to tell you what you can and can't put in your body? And but if I talk to a conservative the way I talk to a libertarian, that just, it's like speaking another language, and it's the same with the left. And so I think it's important to understand who our audience is, understand the language that they speak in and their kind of worldview, and speak to them in that language. Otherwise, it's like speaking, English to someone who only understands Mandarin or something like that, and the message just doesn't get through. So considering your audience is very important. And in Canada here, there are certain things that are pretty difficult to address. Socialized medicine is one. Right. Canadians, it's kind of politics 101 here in Canada, that if you want to be successful, you can't come out against universal health care, even though it's terrible, and even though it costs Canadians. In Fort McMurray, we figured out it costs a typical household about $35,000 a year. It's the amount that each household on average was paying into the healthcare system. And for that, they got like 6-month wait times for MRI, 3-month waits to see a family doctor, on and on. It was terrible. But Canadians love that kind of thing. And so it's very important to understand the sensitivity that people have. And so my goal is to deliver a message in a way that's difficult to dismiss. And to do that, you have to understand and empathize with your audience. And if you know that people are going to tune you out as soon as you say smash socialized medicine, right, well, you have to come up with more creative ways of delivering that message, of walking them through the logic and through the thing. And that requires listening to them. It requires it requires hearing them in order for you to be heard, basically, and you can't come off as an uncaring a-hole, basically.
You bringing up the medicine thing, just it occurred to me, and I don't know if it's probably something that's occurred to you as well. I mean, you're a medical professional and a first responder, which seem to be two positions that are seem to be overrepresented for effective libertarian leaders. Seems to be something about medicine and something about maybe it's the responsibility of risking your own life to and not asking for someone else to do a job. You and I had a very interesting conversation. So I think on those points, if anybody's going to speak to them, you are certainly somebody who speaks with authority. But you and I had an interesting conversation. Fire is one of those things that I think even most libertarians are like, okay, night watchman state, totally cool with still having the fire department, right? I think that's one of the few things where even the most ardent libertarian is like, I could probably deal with that. But you and I had an interesting conversation, and I'd love to share it because we have the time. If you could share a little bit about, as you've looked at the private alternatives to this, and that some of these are actually shaking out as some very interesting examples. I think it would be a great starting place to start talking about how some of this could be moved away from the state and to the private level.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is important, right? It's important, I think, that one of the things that I encourage my candidates and other libertarian activists to do is stop fixating constantly on the problem, right? Government is the problem, but I tend to be of the belief that if you are continually fixating on the problem and cutting it down and criticizing it, you're not putting out a very attractive message, and you might actually be contributing to people not wanting to listen to libertarianism. But if we tell positive stories, if we tell stories about how liberty works, what's alive, what's working around, that can go a long way to help alleviate fears and demonstrate to people how this stuff works. And so fire departments are a good example. Yeah, people generally don't think that fire departments can be run without government, or that's a legitimate function of government. But the history of, for example, fire codes and firefighting doesn't bear that out. There's a company called Rural Metro in the States. It's a private firefighting EMS company. And it was started back in the 40s by a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona, who noticed that his neighbor's house burnt down. He thought that was not good. He couldn't stand by and not do anything about that. So he bought himself a fire truck. And then he went around and sold subscriptions to his neighbors and said, look, if you pay me this, low annual fee, I'll respond to your house and put out your fire. If you don't, no big deal. I'll still respond and I'll put out your fire. It's just that I'll send you a bill because, this is expensive. I'm outlaid a lot of capital to buy this truck and I want to recoup it. And so, most people bought a subscription. And as Rural Metro evolved, eventually they got a contract with some big cities and they built their model on saving the bottom line. And that in part had to do with, okay, how can we decrease our cost of response? And a lot of that, had to do with preventing fires in the first place. So a lot of the fire codes that were developed in the States were developed by Rural Metro because they were trying to cut their bottom line. And so that they developed these codes to prevent buildings from burning. Now, I saw something similar when I was in Tanzania a few years ago. I climbed Kilimanjaro. I toured around Tanzania a little bit, and I noticed all these fire EMS security services that were all over the place. And these services advertise low subscription fees, and so for a low fee, they would respond to your place if there was ever an emergency, and they actually had a guaranteed response time, right? So if they didn't make it there within their guaranteed response time, you see the same thing with pizza delivery services. Sure. Why I never thought that, why wouldn't it apply to fire services? Why don't fire departments and ambulance services have guaranteed response times, or, we pay you a fee? Like that seems like something pretty important, but yet you never see them see that anywhere in North America. But these companies did that, and then they would even go a step further, and some of them had voluntary fire codes. And so for a lower subscription fee, you agreed to abide by some voluntary fire codes and agree to random inspections of your property, and the inspector would go there and make sure that everything was safe, and people would go to those lower codes, right? So there was an incentive there to well, first of all, they didn't want their place to burn down to begin with. So of course I want someone to come in who has the expertise and knowledge to make sure that my residence, my building, my business is safe. But then, on top of that, I'm getting lower fees and I'm getting a guaranteed response time. So this is how a market can deal with some of these things. It doesn't have to be, there doesn't have to be a monopoly on these services. And, there are all sorts of things that emerge when you have government in charge of this. The fire departments tend to become political tools, right? Mm-hmm. So when I worked in Fort McMurray, for example, city councilors would, when it came election time, they would come for ride-alongs and they would try to get in good with the firefighting union, because they knew that if the firefighting union backed them, that they were pretty much guaranteed a council spot. And so, fire trucks would look very fancy, and they had to be good for photo ops, and optics are everything in that kind of environment, whereas performance is everything in a market environment. So I thought that was a very, I'd been immersed in emergency services, but here I was in Tanzania learning all sorts of things that they were doing in this developing country that didn't even have infrastructure for public services. And yet these services were emerging on the open market, and they had innovative and customer-driven policy that didn't even emerge in our developing countries, where we have all this wealth and supposed concern over our customers.
so interesting, man. When they talk about it's going to be nothing but Ancapistan, it's going to be nothing but chaos and buildings burning down and people killing themselves, and it's like, yeah, actually no, bro. Like the places where the government doesn't provide the services, the people actually do. So maybe government should get out of the way. I mean, on that note, or did you have? Was there a follow-up?
No. Well, I mean, I was just going to say, yeah. Look, you see, constantly. Well, I mean, let's look at the Grenfell Tower as an example, right? So what were the regulations that led to that thing going up in flame? There was some green regulations and, requirements. And so their goal was to follow some legislation. It wasn't necessarily to make the people safe. So why weren't there incentives to make those people safe? Why wasn't there some kind of liability in place that incentivized that? And we see this all the time, municipalities will zone lots so close to each other, and they'll have this
Vegas is a prime example of that.
Vinyl siding, and so one house goes up while two houses are going up. Now I can't believe that in a society where the people that sell you those lots have some liability. In other words, you're in a private city, for example, where that city has written into the contract a sense of responsibility of corrective justice if they do something wrong. I can't imagine those are the types of things that would emerge in that city. There would be, very clear. And I mean, my community up in Fort McMurray burnt down pretty much, like 70,000, 80,000 people evacuated. I have to wonder what would happen if there was some personal liability involved, property owners who say, okay, I'm selling you a lot here. In return, I'm going to provide you fire safety, garbage collection, water, all these things for an annual fee or whatever. But part of that is you're taking on responsibility. It's not, you can't shuck it off, right? You can't just say, well, like politicians have no skin in the game. They don't own the property. They'll just, the worst that can happen to them is they'll get voted out.
That's right.
But if you actually own that city, you would have an incredible amount of liability on you, and you'd probably make sure that trees were a little bit more thinned out, that there were some fire breaks in place, that you looked very carefully at conditions around that city. So,
Tim Moen, it is very, very rare to hear a politician talk about how the state should not be involved in the governance of a city, and it's very, very refreshing to hear. I have to say.
Well, listen, and I kind of stopped using the term anarchist because I don't think Ancapistan would be good enough for me.
Right.
I don't think it goes far enough, right? Like I'm for whatever amount of liberty I can get tomorrow that I don't have today. And I'll always be that way. Even if we end up with Ancapistan, it won't be good enough for me. So I think that informs kind of everything we do in the party. We're not creating some kind of libertopian city on the hill that we're aiming for. We're just aiming for a bit more liberty tomorrow than we have today. What can we realistically achieve in a term of government? That's kind of how we approach it. And so we say, let's lower the taxes to the maximum we can in a term of government, given the political climate and all the other things going on. That's kind of how I approach it. And I think, that's probably, to me, that seems like a more realistic way of approaching things than trying to envision some libertopia that is a utopian vision that it's never going to look like that anyways. Let's just instill in people the idea that government is an evil, and let's try to limit it as much as possible to the degree we can today and tomorrow, and the rest will sort itself out.
So for those Canadians who are watching the show, we do have actually a pretty big Canadian audience, and who are now saying, oh, wow, Libertarian Party, actually, this sounds good. What's your message to them? What's the next steps that a Canadian who wants to help you and help themselves to build some more liberty in that country, what can they do?
Well, they can join our party, libertarian.ca, and get involved. We are, even if you're not interested in running as a candidate, or maybe you're not even all that interested in political action at all, it's a great network to connect with. We're kind of like the nexus for libertarians across Canada who are involved with the party to varying degrees. But if nothing else, it connects you with like-minded people that are in your area and that have your back when things get tough. And it's nice to it can feel very isolating and alone as a libertarian. And Canada is very spread out and very sparsely populated in a lot of areas, and you'd be surprised that there are like-minded people near you. And so joining the party can help with that. But if you're interested in taking this to the next level, take on some responsibility. Step up to the plate, stand on that platform. It's there waiting for you. It's free. You can just stand on that platform and preach your message. You just can't be afraid to do it. Or you can be afraid, but you have to have the courage to work through that fear. You stand on that platform, and even though your voice shakes and your knees knock, tell the truth, and we'll help you do that. And you take that responsibility on, and good things start to happen in your life and for the libertarian movement in general. And the party provides a good platform to do that. So if you don't have your own thing going on, and obviously running for politics and doing this kind of thing isn't for everyone, but if you are interested in getting involved in liberty activism and you don't know where to start, this is a good place to start. And so I encourage you to jump on and join the party and get more information. And again, go to libertarian.ca, follow me on Twitter @Moen_Tim. And, befriend me on Facebook if you want. I'm very open, and I can usually answer most questions that come my way. And so please look us up, and let's do this.
Well, I told people that they were going to come away from this interview inspired, and I think I've succeeded because I'm feeling inspired. So we're coming up on time, man. Tim, thank you for being here. Tim Moen, leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Thank you so much for being on. We're going to keep up to date with you, and I hope that got the baby vodka. He's got my vodka. I see it's already half gone there.
It's good stuff. It's good stuff.
Thank you. And I'll be sending you guys some more congratulatory bottles after the next election, and you guys secure some seats. So, Tim Moen, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Vin.
All right, Christian.
Yeah.
Do you want to move to Canada now and be in the Libertarian Party?
Yeah, right? He's great.
Yeah, awesome.
He's great.
I mean, that's what I want out of a politician.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, if there were more of those, I might actually consider voting. And maybe, hopefully he's not the last of a breed, man.
Yeah.
I hope that people are inspired to pick up the mantle. But I really do like the idea of, and it's that you can't be broke with a pocket full of diamonds.
Yeah.
I'm really someone who is all about the build it and they will come idea.
Right.
I'm someone who's all about, like, you know what? Express yourself, do liberty-oriented things. Bring some value to the world.
Yep.
Communicate your message. Don't think about the outcome. And someone will see you.
Yep.
Charles Saatchi, I think that Tim is a great example of this. One of my favorite quotes, and I've probably said it on the show before, but I'll say it again because it's amazing. Charles Saatchi, who's the largest contemporary art collector in the world, his private gallery, the Saatchi Gallery, has so much art in it that when he dies, he's willed it to the City of London, and it's going to become the London Museum of Contemporary Art. That's his private gallery that he opens to people to be able to visit. He, of course, started Saatchi and Saatchi, originally born in Iraq, actually, started Saatchi and Saatchi, the very famous, huge international ad agency. But he said, talent, somebody asked him about, he's discovered so many contemporary artists. And they said, would these people have been discovered had you not discovered them? And he said, here's the deal. Talent is in such short supply in the world that it's rather more likely that mediocrity is mistaken for genius than that true genius goes undiscovered.
Wow.
Get out there, show your genius. Yeah. You're going to get discovered.
Yep.
Because I see in politics, there's a lot of mediocrity being called genius. But I think that the principles of libertarianism, that's genius. And it's about what David Icke said on the show. It's got to be about the message first, second, and third. And the message resonates. Stand behind the message. Doesn't have to be about you. Mm-hmm. Just stand behind the message of principles. And I think it just carries the whole way.
Awesome.
So
good way to end the show.
I agree, man.
Yeah.
And that is the end of the show. Thank you so much for today. We didn't get to the Syria story, but it's going to stick around because we'll add that on to next week. And I know more will develop at that time anyway.
Cool.
It was a great show either way,
Yeah.
dude. Thank you for today, man.
Thank you.
Let me say goodbye to the people. So, today has been all about principles and principles over preferences. So I really want to thank a very principled individual, maybe the most principled politician in North America. Prove me wrong, please. Send me over somebody who's more principled. I want to thank Tim Moen for being on, the leader of the Libertarian Party of Canada. Any of you Canadians who want to get involved, libertarian.ca. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and I want to thank all the people that I met at Porcupine Freedom Fest. I'm sure I will be back to New Hampshire, and I encourage all of you to go and check out this event. It's a really, really cool one. You can bring the family, you can go up there and camp. The weather was killer, the people were great, and thank you to all the people at the Free State Project for having me out and letting me express my opinion on your stage. So that's the end of the show for today. If you want to check out our archives, you can do that at youtube.com/Vin Armani or youtube.com/activistpost. That's where you're going to get the best of. We sort of chop up all of the sections and you can watch them in little bite-sized pieces. Also, listen to the podcast, subscribe at iTunes and Stitcher. We'll be back again next week at 10 a.m. on Monday. And until then, stay free.